Welcome to this series entitled Rereading the Book of Revelation. My name is Sigve Tonstad. I am a medical doctor. I have a specialty in internal medicine. I have also done a PhD in New Testament studies and have worked as a full professor of biblical interpretation at Loma Linda University. My role there now is research professor of biblical interpretation. And we have chosen to call the series Rereading Revelation for a reason, because I cannot think of any book that is more in need of being reread or more deserving of being reread. We did this series earlier this year, and we are now doing an improved version that we hope will be improved with respect to sound quality, image, and even content, especially the content of the rereading part of it. So, lecture number 1, Retrieving the Vision of Healing. That is our first priority, and we will start reading from Revelation, from chapter 21, quite familiar verses 3 and 4. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, the dwelling place of God is among human beings. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And God will wipe every tear from their eyes. And death will be no more, nor grief, nor wailing, nor pain will be any more, for the former state of things has passed away." So why am I beginning with this text? Because it projects a vision of healing. And we are saying that that is the main errand of the book, to show us Revelation's vision of healing. So here, death will be no more, grief will be no more. Every tear will be wiped away. That's what this book promises to do. And for a world that is in need of healing, a vision like this should resonate, should make a difference. Here in chapter 22, verse 17, this is a chapter that I have, or a verse that has had a sort of musical quality for me ever since I was a child. Here, and the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." And let the one who hears say, "Come." And the thirsty, let her come. And the one who would like to have it, let her take the water of life as a gift. And here we have some images to illustrate. The water of life comes from the river of life. Now, this is the river in my home village. It's true. It is not precisely the river of life, but it is a beautiful river. And the water from the river of life is offered to the thirsty in the present. And the healing waters of the river of life is also not just something that we are looking for in the future. It is that too, but it is also the promise of a healing vision for present need. So, to summarize or to add it up, it's like Revelation cannot get enough of it. It wants to spell it out. The vision of healing. The sea was no more. Death will be no more. Grief will be no more. Wailing will be no more. Pain will be no more. All things accursed will be no more. Night will be no more. 7 things. And the first and the last on the list, they are in some ways images not just of deficiency, but of evil. So the evil things of present reality will disappear, as symbolized by the chaotic forces of the sea and by the darkness of night that will disappear. And my image here is a world in a sort of enveloped by healing influences, as it were. So now, how to make sense of the discrepancy between Revelation's vision of healing and Revelation's reputation, because this book has a different reputation. And we have some people here, I will tell you in a minute who they are in greater detail, and just run through some questions. If we ask the novelist, the literary critic, the psychologist or psychiatrist, or the philosopher, or the Protestant reformers, or biblical scholars, with a few exceptions, or popular culture, especially popular religious culture, and especially popular religious culture in America, if we ask them their opinion of the book of Revelation, you will be surprised. This is D.H. Lawrence. He is our novelist, and those are his dates. And he is famous more for other books than for what he did on the book of Revelation. But this is what he says. His verdict is that Revelation is a repulsive work. He calls it repulsive, disgusting, beastly, hideous. And then he concludes by saying, just as inevitably as Jesus had to have a Judas Iscariot among his disciples, so did there have to be a revelation in the New Testament. The book of Revelation is the Judas of the New Testament. The book of Revelation secures betrayal in print of the Jesus of the New Testament, as it were. And that's the verdict of D.H. Lawrence. If we ask the literary critic, and Harold Bloom, who was a professor at Yale University, he has been recognized as the most famous, most influential literary critic of his time. He wrote many, many books. His verdict is that Revelation's message is a message of resentment. Resentment and not love is the teaching of the revelation of St. John the Divine. It is a book without wisdom, goodness, kindness, or affection of any kind. Perhaps it is appropriate that a celebration of the end of the world should be not only barbaric, but scarcely literate. So Revelation's vision is negative through and through, and the author is not even literate, as it were. So very negative verdict. Okay, let's do the psychiatrist. This is Carl Gustav Jung, who was almost as famous as Sigmund Freud and lived about the same time, though he lived a bit longer than Freud and was in some ways a Freudian too. So he has subjected John of Revelation to a sort of psychological assessment, as it were, and he finds in the book destructive fury, a veritable orgy of hatred, wrath, vindictiveness, and blind destructive fury that revels in fantastic images of terror, breaks out, and with blood and fire overwhelms a world which Christ had just endeavored to restore to the original state of innocence and loving communion with God. So this is a little similar to D.H. Lawrence, that Jesus has done some good things in the world, and then Revelation comes and wreaks havoc with the whole work of Jesus, and then Revelation is then a contrast to what we know of Jesus in the other books. All right, let's do the philosopher. Our philosopher will be Nietzsche, and there is much more to say about Nietzsche than his view on Revelation, and some of the things we might say about him might be good. But here is what he says. He sees Revelation as a book preaching revenge. What conversely did the Jews feel against Rome? one can surmise it from 1,000 symptoms, but it is sufficient to carry one's mind back to the Johannian apocalypse, that most obscene of all written outbursts, which has revenge on its conscience. So the aim of Revelation is to bring a message of revenge in Nietzsche's view. Well, enough about those people. Let's do some theologians. Let's look at what the Protestant reformers will say. Let's look at the verdict of Martin Luther, who will call the Revelation a book without Christ. And here you have a depiction of Luther, and this is what he says. I miss more than one thing in this book, and it makes me consider it to be neither apostolic nor prophetic. For me, this is reason enough not to think highly of it. Christ is neither taught nor known in it. This is quite an amazing thing that Luther sees the book that way, I grant that. But that is what he says, and that will color Revelation's reputation. And then the other reformers, here is the Swiss reformer Zwingli, who was mayor of Zurich for a while. And here is the French-Swiss reformer Calvin, who was mayor in Geneva for a while. So what do they say? They say that Revelation is not even a biblical book. This is Zwingli's verdict. With the Apocalypse we have no concern, for it is not a biblical book, even though all they seek in it serves us and not them. That is to say, it's a book that serves our view, but we don't really like it, and so on. And Calvin is, what does he do? Calvin doesn't even say anything about Revelation. He just ignores it. It's the contempt of ignoring it. Well, what does contemporary biblical scholars say? And here I will look to John Collins, who is a professor of Old Testament at Yale University currently, still teaching there, and married to a great Revelation scholar, Adela Yarbrough Collins. So he has written on apocalyptic literature and considers Revelation as a book that belongs to the apocalyptic genre. And this is what he says. What we find in Revelation is the projection into the future of what was unfulfilled in the past. Jesus did not destroy the wicked in this earthly life, but he would return with supernatural power to complete the task. So another side of Jesus, Jesus projecting characteristics quite different than the Jesus that comes with a healing message in the Gospels. And one more before we leave that and look more to popular culture. And this is a theological verdict by C.H. Dodd, who is a major theologian in the 20th century in the UK and has written on these matters. And he says that we are bound to judge that in its conception of the character of God and his attitude to man, the book of Revelation falls below the level not only of the teachings of Jesus, but of the best parts of the Old Testament. So Revelation fails the theological test, supposedly because it has a low conception of God. It's a more primitive view of God, as it were. So in popular culture, especially the popular culture, religious culture in America, we have similarities to these views and a difference. So this is the Left Behind series that has been published now some years ago, a decade or so ago. And this 16-volume series claimed to be based on the book of Revelation and had a spectacular success in the market, 60 million copies. sold in America at the last time I checked. It has not been a success in Europe. It has been playing to sentiments that are much more saleable in America. And this I will quote now from volume 12 called Glorious Appearing. This is on the return of Jesus. And again, notice that this is claims to be based on Revelation. So tens of thousands fell dead, simply dropping where they stood, their bodies ripped open, blood pooling in great masses. Tens of thousands grabbed their heads or their chests, fell to their knees, and writhed as they were invisibly sliced asunder. Their innards and entrails gushed to the desert floor, their blood pooling and rising in the unforgiving brightness of the glory of Christ. Their flesh dissolved, their eyes melted, and their tongues disintegrated. So this confirms in every way the sort of message of retribution, revenge, destruction that we have heard from Harold Bloom or D.H. Lawrence or Nietzsche. But there is a difference. These people, these readers of Revelation, actually seems to celebrate it, while the others find the work to be repulsive, while secular readers find this to be repulsive. Religious readers and religious readers in America find it to be a scene that they celebrate, they applaud it, and it sells. It has enormous or amazing market success. So we have some issues here before we get into the book. The issue is what happened to Revelation's vision of healing, and what damage has this done to Revelation's reputation. So again, and here I'm using an illustration from the Douce Apocalypse from the 13th century. You find it in the Bodleian collection in Oxford, at Oxford University. The 7 bowls of Revelation and the scene of destruction here. And the artist may actually have done a fairly good job here, but let's see. We are using it to illustrate our question again. If we ask the novelist, the literary critic, the psychologist, or the philosopher, or the Protestant reformers, or biblical scholars with a few exceptions, or popular culture, especially popular religious culture, and especially popular religious culture in America, they will say that Revelation is not a vision of healing. And the reputation of Revelation struggles under that impression because so many voices combine to say that this is not a vision of healing. And so this could be someone, and this could actually be a reflection of, to some extent, the sentiments of popular religious culture in America, that there is in that culture sentiments of resentment and revenge. And those sentiments of resentment and revenge, they are fueled, inspired to some extent by readings of Revelation. And while this view is in some circles celebrated, in other circles it is a message: stay away. Stay away from the book of Revelation, because its vision is not helpful to us. So this sets up 2 contrasts that I think are relevant as we stand on the sort of threshold of reading this book. Assessing Revelation's vision, assessing Revelation's emphasis. Should we think of it in medical terms? We do need to think about it in medical terms if we wish to have a vision of healing. The language of healing is medical language. Is that option on offer in Revelation? And I will say yes, in a big way. Or should we think of it in legal terms? More is a judicial message, which is definitely mostly the reputation of Revelation, and maybe in a way that is biasing or unhelpful to our reading. Again, should we think of revelation in terms of retribution? That is its reputation. Or should we think of it more as revelation? Something is brought to view that actually helps us and leads us to see that the message is a message of healing after all. And here again, similar contrast. A message of healing is parachuting into our world. And it contends, though, with impressions that there is anguish in the world already and more anguish to come by the criteria of the way, or by the way some people read Revelation. So we have entrenched perceptions here, and I need to step out of the picture. I hope you can see it. This is the entrenched perception of revelation against which we contend. Revelation as a vision of retribution rather than as a vision of healing. One more thing, just to frame issues, to frame options in the way we read this book. I take this from an article written by Gail O'Day, who was the editor of the Journal of Biblical Literature for a number of years, and is a prominent reader of the Gospel of John and of Revelation. And this is from an article she wrote in 2005. So she contrasts how Revelation is, the role of Revelation in church liturgy and in popular culture. In church liturgies, she says, we have Revelation projecting a message of glory and of triumph of God. And we have songs that draw on Revelation, crown him with many crowns, shall we gather at the river? And we have not a word of judgment to be found. So all of it is sweetness, all of it is sort of calming and hopeful and gentle. And shall we gather at the river is a song that some of us know. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows from the throne of God. That's church liturgy. But in popular culture, it's very different. The texts of praise and celebration completely disappear, and the texts of judgment and warning predominate or dominate. And popular appropriations tend to make the conflict between good and evil into a parlor game, while liturgical appropriations tend to render that conflict nearly invisible. So these contrasts are in some ways, first of all, they are great contrasts, and second of all, they don't quite get it, either here in church liturgy or the message in popular culture. So when I started thinking that I might go and do a PhD in New Testament studies, I started reading, I started working on my Greek skills and so on. And this is a little over 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, when I started to do this in earnest. I had already done a master's degree, a BA, an MA in biblical studies, but I had some things on my mind that made me think I should do more. So I thought of going to the University of St. Andrews. And one of the professors there is Richard Bauckham. He's now retired, but he was at St. Andrews. And I had read in one of his books this statement: the Apocalypse of John is a work of immense learning, astonishingly meticulous literary artistry, remarkable creative imagination, radical political critique, and profound theology. And you can remember D.H. Lawrence saying, "Oh, the author of Revelation is hardly literate." And here he said Bauckham credits him with astonishingly meticulous literary artistry. So this is surely a kind of rehabilitation of the book of Revelation that is a step far from what we have in D.H. Lawrence. So I came to St. Andrews very hopeful, very happy to meet these types of ideas. And yet when I arrived in St. Andrews, I was sleepless. I was sleepless in St. Andrews. I am not a good sleeper to begin with. And I had a task ahead of me, reading Revelation as a vision of healing and establishing a storyline for the book of Revelation that leads easily, almost effortlessly, to that vision of healing. So here I am in St. Andrews. It's the cradle of golfing. This is the old course in St. Andrews. I'm not a golfer, but I have run around as a jogger, run around that golf course many times. And at the far end of that golf course, there are some sand dunes and some reeds and stuff. And many times I knelt on my run in those sand dunes because I felt that my task was not easy to do. St. Andrews is also a major city in Scotland, was a major city in Scotland. It has Scotland's oldest university, and it had big church ruins from the days when St. Andrews was a major Protestant city and a site for the conflict between Catholics and Protestants. And John Knox, the Scottish reformer, preached in St. Andrews. So here you can have an overview, and there is a little feel in St. Andrews, in my view, that this is a sort of model for the New Jerusalem. It's a very cute, very, very nice place. Here I am, sleepless in St. Andrews, because most readers, including my mentor Richard Bauckham, and including just about anyone of Revelation scholars, they will say that Revelation's horizon is Roman. It is Roman imperial horizon. It is a critique of the Roman Empire. It is not, as I think, a cosmic horizon. So the Roman earthly historical perspective dominates to the exclusion, almost exclusion of the cosmic perspective. And that to me is a misreading. And how do you do that? How could I get a sort of position myself to make my project more attractive to my mentors? And my project had in some ways been incubating from my childhood, having Revelation read in our home, in my home village of Tonstad in Norway, being further enticed by the message of this book when I was in high school at a boarding school in East Norway, and not losing a sense of the importance of the subject when I was a theology student at Middle East University in Beirut, Lebanon, or when I made it to America, to Andrews University, where I finished college, or when I went to medical school in Loma Linda University, and have the sense that a vision of healing is needed even more, or here then ending up at the University of St. Andrews, where my educational journey sort of came to an end, and a long journey it has been. Now, in support of or in pursuit of this vision of healing, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more, mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. So you might wonder, how did it go? My foray, my journey, what did it lead to? Well, here is what it led to. I have published some articles, and I have published my dissertation first, with the title Saving God's Reputation. That is what I think Revelation is up to. No less than that. And have I shown in this presentation that there is a reputational issue with Revelation? Have I shown that there is a problem with the book's reputation and with the book's representation of God as it is perceived by readers? I certainly have. So, and is there a problem in the world of God's reputation in more general terms? There is that too. And so Revelation's errand is to save God's reputation. That should make it more interesting. And one of my mentors, he liked what I did. So after some years, I was asked to write the Revelation commentary in the Paideia New Testament commentary series that was published here in 2019. So these two books and some articles, and now this presentation to bolster our case. So what happened then? So in this tension, or this choice of roads, of paths to take, should it be Roman or should it be cosmic? I think I won acceptance, at least to some extent, that the cosmic perspective of Revelation has been underprojected. And in some ways, the Roman perspective has been overprojected and in some ways has taken the book hostage, you might say. And then the options between healing here and vengeance here, I would be bolder to say that it is the vision of healing that deserves to come out ahead and not the vision of vengeance. And the same thing here. Should it be retribution as here, or is it revelation as here? And again, the perceptions that Revelation's errand is to bring a message of retribution is not well taken. So let's do a review. Now, as I will try to do for all these presentations, a summary of where we have come. So readers of Revelation must contend with and must overcome the book's reputation of resentment, revenge, and retribution. I will say that that is a misguided reading and very unfortunate. And then a Revelation in church liturgy, projecting bliss without conflict, is not an adequate remedy for the gross misapprehension of the book in popular culture and its perception of conflict without bliss. Bliss without conflict, conflict without bliss, those are not the best options. We have to do better than that. And here, one more. The rereader starts with an advantage. He or she knows that the book ends with a vision of healing. And I have now tried to give you the advantage of being a rereader by beginning at the end and showing that at the end of the book there is a vision of healing. So in some ways, you're already sort of attuned to the advantages of being a rereader. And now this one. The rereader starts with an advantage. Advantage number 2. He or she knows that the violence in the book is the work of someone other than God. Well, I am asserting that. I have not shown you the evidence for that yet. I cannot then sort of cash in on that and saying that we know that already. I am saying that once we have read and reread this book, this will be what we find. But I concede that second rereader advantage, we don't have that yet. And the same thing for my number 3 on rereader advantage, that he or she knows that before the healing of the world comes the healing of the name. That is another thing that we will see when we become good rereaders. I concede that we could not say that quite yet. And then this one. How is it that Revelation is read as though it consolidates the misperceptions of God that it is commissioned to correct? How could it go so wrong? with this book that it actually is used to reinforce ideas that the book is arguing against. That is amazing. One more thing, the last one. How is it that a world in acute need of healing is at risk of missing out on the vision of healing that meets its need, the vision of healing found in the book of Revelation?